Good afternoon. My name is Sahana,
I'm Meghana.
and this is Shankar, our co-host and co-producer. Today we're going to be discussing the book When Breath Becomes Air, an extremely insightful autobiography about an incredible man and how he dealt with his life and how he dealt with death. So, do you want to give some more background on the book?
Yeah, sure. So his name was Paul Kalanithi. He was a doctor and neurosurgeon. He was like the book details. He wrote about why he chose medicine, how he chose medicine, why he decided to go into that field, and then his experiences with like the highs and lows of medicine, as well as how he got his diagnosis. Because this book was published after he died, unfortunately, from cancer. So details his like struggle with the diagnosis, what he decided to do after he got the diagnosis, and how he spent his ending days. And though he didn't get to finish the book, so his wife does end it for us with an epilogue.
All right. So there are so many insightful points in the book, but one of them that really stood out to me was Dr. Kalanithi's contention between literature and science. Do you want to give us some background on how this came to be?
Yeah, sure. So his dad, when he was growing up, his dad was very involved in medicine. He was a cardiologist, whereas his mom kind of encouraged him in the arts, that related side. So when he went to college, he decided to like do more of a focus on the arts, but he still had like this question of like, what is life? Like, what is the meaning behind it? All of these kinds of questions.
Yeah. So he when he went to college, he got undergraduate degrees in philosophy of history and philosophy of medicine. But he felt distance from his peers because of his like special interest in the sciences, particularly in biology. And he also wasn't satisfied with just learning about the philosophy of medicine. He wanted to actually get practical experience. So he ended up going for a degree in biology.
No, he
And
ended up going to like med school. So
yeah,
he ended up doing like med school at like Stanford, and that like kind of opened him up to like the field of practicality, like with
yeah.
cadavers and stuff.
Yeah, so when he was in the medical field, he felt like he could actually have practical experience. Particularly, the first time he felt this was when he was dissecting a cadaver, and he just felt like the realness of it all sink in. And that definitely impacted him as a person and his growth throughout
Hmm.
the book.
Yeah, because he felt like without like touching somebody, without like actually seeing how life and death like ebbs and flows before your eyes, you can't be like a good doctor, which is extremely true, I think. Another good point, like we noticed about this book, is that as a reader, when you read this book, you learn so much about like empathy and what a sacrifice it is to have empathy as a doctor. When you think of like the things like empathy and kindness, you don't associate them with sacrifice. But Dr. Kalanithi in his book, he does write that like more than just providing physical support and physical strength to your patient, which is like unduly important. It's more important to provide that mental fortitude for your patient. To kind of reassure them, just be there for them. You don't have to tell them like everything's going to be okay. Just be like, no matter what happens, like I'm always going to be here for you. And why is that a sacrifice? It's a sacrifice because Kalanithi himself, like he witnessed like patients that he wasn't able to save. There were cases that he couldn't solve, like diseases that couldn't be like fixed with like a surgery, and those kinds of like things like that really does impact you, and you have to like tell yourself like you have to stay strong through all of this because the patient is suffering, and some people like feel like a complex about it where they think why should I be suffering when my patient is the one that's feeling all of the pain, and so a lot of doctors like get like these kind of like coping mechanisms to deal with that. So he talks a lot about like how much like it's a sacrifice and how much it takes a toll on your mental health just to like care for your patients, just to have like that feeling of empathy. But never once did he regret it.
Yeah, like consistently he still like shows this empathy because what scares him more than the pain from showing empathy is like being indifferent to the deaths of his patients. Like that absolutely terrifies him. And he's like, that's never going to happen to me. I'm never gonna witness the death of somebody and just be like, oh, that just happened. He's never gonna be indifferent about it. And that is like so truly inspiring.
Yeah, I think like when it all changed for him was like one of his friends like actually died in like a car crash before, and that's like when he started to feel like this kind of thing where like I need to be like more emotionally connected to my patients. So like when there's this one lady in the book who was like receiving her diagnosis, instead of just giving it to her and walking away, he sat her down and he was like telling her like he walked her very calmly through the steps of the treatment. He just told it to her in a very calm way, just calming her down from the situation. And he was like, just like a word of like that is so important. And he came to realize, I think like the another theme is like kind of like that's connected to this is like the fact that like the little things really do matter, and not just like by giving people kind words or phrases. Like one of the things he said is like when he was doing his residency, one of the things that he really like didn't like to do at the beginning was paperwork, just because he thought it was so tedious. But he then came to realize that while he was doing the paperwork, it actually showed him the stories behind his patients' lives, and so he shouldn't just like disregard them as something useless. It was actually something really meaningful.
Another point was like just his struggles with life and death, which might seem kind of self-evident. There's multiple factors to this. He's a patient, he's a doctor, and he's like a very philosophical individual as well. So obviously these would come into question for him. In fact, the reason that he chose neurosurgery in the first place is because he wanted to understand how the brain affected people's identities. And he's a very philosophical person, so it makes sense that this would come to the forefront of his novel.
Yeah, I feel like he's just a curious like person. He just wants to learn more and more and more, and that really like comes into play when he's asking such insightful questions like throughout the book.
Yeah, so the first time he experiences like really death is when he's dissecting cadavers in medical school, and he's like these cadavers that used to be people, but now they're just bodies, and he feels like this sharp disconnect, like the weight of life and death in his hands and the scalpel. Um, Throughout his surgeries, he realizes like being a doctor specifically requires like the highest level of precision, especially since he's a neurosurgeon. So he has to do everything with the utmost detail because one slip of his hand could mean that the patient is injured for life. So he like cultivates this precision, this capability. He kind of burns himself out with his work in this way because of just like the amount of focus that's necessary.
Oh yeah, that's why he says like in the book, like even though he did work like these long like hellish kind of hours, like he never felt like it was that long, especially like when he was doing the neurosurgery, because like when he was doing surgery, like everything locked down to that one moment, like he was just lost in that surgery. So he kind of like he was like I couldn't really feel the passage of time that well.
Yeah, another point that connects back to empathy is that he was scared that his closeness to death would reduce his sensitivity to it, which is why he cultivated empathy to such an extent because he never wanted to be insensitive towards the deaths of people because every death still mattered, even if there were many of them in his like lifetime.
And then obviously like we can't ignore the very sad like diagnosis that he did get cancer. When he felt that when he did get his diagnosis, it was pretty like jarring for him because like he was so used to being the doctor and like now he was the patient. And he was kind of like used to like when he was reading the reports, him like as a doctor, he'd be like, okay, like they have like this chance of dying, like there's this chance of living. But and he would always like ask like oncologist, the person who was treating him with when he had cancer, like what is my chance for dying? What is my chance for living? But then the oncologist would never tell him because she was like, there's always a chance that you'll survive. So there's no point in me telling you like what's the chance you're gonna live or die.
Exactly. So like there's always he in the beginning he doesn't really accept himself as a patient. He still sees himself as a doctor because that's the role he set himself into. So when he becomes the person on the other side of that exchange, it's so jarring for him. And after he gets like the first round of cancer, it ends up like receding to an extent and he's able to get his job back. And when he gets his job back, he's looking for like what meaning he can find to like an even greater extent because of his like really close brush with death. He feels like he needs to find meaning in the life that he's living, so he finds like so much joy in his wife, he finds joy in his patients, he finds joy in his job, and that means so much more to him now after his like really close experience with death.
And when he does eventually get, he makes sure that his physical therapy is like targeted towards the needs of a doctor, and that he makes sure that he can stand for long hours. And like when he does get better from this first round of cancer, he like makes sure like Sahana said to like talk to all of his patients. Unfortunately, his cancer did like relapse and come back, which is like extremely sad because like this is right after him and his wife decided to like have a kid. So they realized that like he would only get to raise a kid for like a little bit. They even knew this like before he got the second round, but he was like, it's worth it just to like see her and to know like my wife is such an amazing like capable person. She's also a doctor. So she can definitely raise a kid like on her own, you know, like. But he wanted her. One of the things that I think is further cemented like in his caring and love is that he wanted his wife to be like completely okay with the fact that she would have to raise their child like on her own, which like she was like, yeah, of course I will. Like I think I just want like a reminder.
Yeah, and then after that relapse, he just there was like this imminence of death. He knows he's going to die, and that obviously would like gnaw away at any person. Just like knowing that the fact that he's going to die. So he like looks for places that he can find joy, and he ends up finding joy in the fact in his child. Like when his child ends up being born, he finds joy in her,
Katie.
in Katie, and like I feel like in the end, what he really wanted to do is he wanted to leave a legacy. He wanted to leave a mark on the world. He wanted to understand life and death. There were so many things he wanted to do, and even though he wasn't able to do all of them, he definitely did leave a legacy through his child, through this like incredible book, through his work in the medical field, through all the patients he treated. Like he's
Yeah.
a truly amazing
I think
individual.
more than just leaving a mark on the world, he wanted to leave a mark on like all of his patients to make sure like even like in life and death that they are loved, that they are cared for, that they are understood, that like the meaning of life like lies within them. Like it
Mm-hmm.
lives in their strength to recover. It lives in
Yes.
their strength to survive, or even if they pass away, it lives in their strength to fight. So I think that he did in fact have a good huge impact. And not just like on his patients, but on like the future generation of people who want to be doctors. Dr. Kalanithi provides an amazing like insight into what it's like to be a doctor. He doesn't spare the hardships of being a doctor, but he also describes like the most beautiful moments of being a doctor as well.
Another note. I feel like I did this, you did this too. We read this book on a plane.
Yeah.
And reading this book on a plane just kind of made it hit that much harder. I'm
Yeah.
not sure why. But I think it was what encouraged you to actually pursue medical
Yeah, I
medicine.
think I when I was reading this book, it was like when I was on like the fence between like deciding between medicine and like another field, and this book was the one that pushed me to decide I
Because
wanted to do medicine.
like his life was just so beautiful in the entire thing. And it
Mm.
just like it's so inspiring.
Yeah, like it was definitely imperfect, but like I feel like the imperfections are what makes it like even more human, you
Mm-hmm.
know. It was definitely like he's truly an inspiration, I think.
It's such like a beautiful book, and it's such an interesting like just such an interesting and beautiful life, and I just so recommend that you read it. It's
Mm.
just such an experience to read this book. Like
Mm.
we haven't done it justice. There's so much more that happens within it, that there's so much meaning that you can more meaning that you can derive hopefully. So I highly recommend reading this autobiography, and thank you.
Yeah, we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.